Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers of Washington and its monthly author showcase. I'm your host, Mark Miller. Today, author and artist David Mecklenburg, which I just mutilated your name, is here at the Claw Hot Seat. And David was here once before with our Halloween show, and he had this excellent ghoulish dinner scene that you read online, and so that's why I wanted to come back and pick your brain and find out what part of your medulla that you use to come up with all these weird, horrific ideas. So welcome to the Claw Hot Seat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleased to meet you here.
So tell us how you got started writing.
Well, aside from the basics like we all do in school where they make us write, I probably didn't start until, I'm guessing, I kind of wanted to start writing around 1978 is what I'm thinking. And I say that because that's after Star Wars and a couple of very inspirational films had come out that sort of like, oh, I want to make stories like that too. And that's kind of what I think when I sort of started. I wasn't very serious about it. I remember I had a little sort of kid's typewriter to work on, but I didn't really start writing longer pieces until I got into high school. And then that's when I decided, like, I really want to do this. And I went through college and with a majored in creative writing, and then I went and got a Master of Fine Arts at the University of Washington.
So you actually started on a typewriter?
Yes.
So you're one of the, for your audience out there, that's one of these little mechanical things that was pre-computers. So the people that actually learned on a typewriter, we understand what we're talking about. It's so much fun. You also now have your mother, who is a sci-fi writer.
Right.
Has she influenced how you got started?
It's interesting. I don't think, my mom and I don't write in at all similar ways, but my earliest memories of what it meant to be a writer was going along with her to a writing group that she had.
Oh. Okay.
And so now my initial memories when somebody says the word writer, it's a woman, or a group of them actually, drinking a lot of red wine and General Foods International coffee. They have manuscripts spread everywhere. They talk, they laugh, they point things out, they redline things, they use words like narrative, they use words like plot. And overhearing a lot of that stuff and seeing what it was, I thought, well, I want to be one of those too at some point.
Okay.
And that's kind of where it really happened. And actually, those sessions were when my mom first started the book that she was showcasing here, actually. Eventually, the thing was, I grew up in a science fiction household.
Oh, okay.
So there was always some Frank Herbert, there was always some Le Guin, there was always Asimov laying around. But I, of course, had to kind of find my own voice, and I found myself being drawn more to fantasy and mythology. And especially, I think, the two things, like I said, in '78, by that point I had already seen they reran in theaters. That's back when we had to do that and we couldn't just download it. They reran Jason and the Argonauts, which was, you know, with Ray Harryhausen and Nancy Kovac as Medea. And
God, that's who Medea was?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so I remember being very wanting to kind of write stories like that. And also 1977 is when the Rankin Bass Hobbit first came out. That was the old animated version of that. Yeah. And mind you, I was 7 years old myself. That was my introduction to Middle Earth. I still have that movie. I still watch it.
There are some people, there are some people who say that that's actually the better movie.
It's better. Yeah, I won't go into Peter Jackson's work on that, but those were kind of the ones. And so I kind of started writing stuff that was more along those lines, more fantastic. And that eventually got me, at some point, reading I think a lot of us read Stephen King, of course, during the 70s and 80s, and then on to Clive Barker and some other things like that. And so in the question about sort of the ghoulish, wet horror that was written, I would probably say a lot of that comes from Clive Barker. So I think that's kind of where it started, but by the time I got to college, I had started reading a lot of other things, and then I can't really leave out the other big influence book on my life was Moby Dick. Because yes, I loved ships, I loved the sea, I loved whales. That had everything in it. As I've gotten older, I get more and more amazed that Melville could write that, because it seems like he wrote the whole universe within that book. I bring a different interpretation to it every time I read it now.
But he also, and this is why I get in these arguments with people in some of these writing groups, you look at how he wrote and then how people write today. Writing evolves.
Oh, yes.
And writing styles change. But at the same time, some styles are so unique. Now, I will have to admit, I never was literary enough to wade through Moby Dick. I read a few portions of it, and he does. He has that very unique rhythm and stuff in the way he writes, and then just how he starts out with, starts out the whole book and everything. That's kind of the way they wrote back then.
Right.
And then you look at the way write people down. Of course, one of the pet peeves I have now, too many people try to write like they're writing a movie.
You can't get away from cinema as far as it's, even in the way in craft schools it's taught now, where they talk an establishing scene.
I know.
That's an establishing shot. That's kind of lifted from cinema. It's very difficult to get away from it.
Well, but to me, and I just got another argument. I get in arguments online about this. I think it's killing, to a certain extent, I think Hollywood is killing literature because everybody wants everything to go like a movie. In the first 5 minutes, you need a death or an explosion or something big's got to happen. Otherwise, they're gonna leave and go get more popcorn. And so, quite often, people go, "Oh, that's too boring. You're developing it too long. You need something else." And I'm going, just be a little bit patient, and then you're gonna make a better story.
Yeah, I think when people didn't have television and movies, and they just sat around reading.
Yeah.
And back then, they still read poetry to a greater extent.
Yeah.
People would have Robert Browning right next to Melville on their, well, not a lot of people had Melville actually, but a lot of people had Robert Browning, and a lot of people would have Wordsworth and Longfellow and those, and they would read them because you didn't have anything else except maybe break it up with a family song because everybody used to sing together too.
Right.
And they don't do that anymore, and I do think that affects writing. It's interesting, like with Lord of the Rings, there's no way that book would have been allowed to be printed today by a major publisher because it takes too long for it to get going.
Right.
And yet the funny thing is, for me, that whole scene where they're leaving the Shire and they get lost in the forest, that's actually my favorite part of the book now, because I feel like I'm on a travelogue then. It's not an adventure story. I'm just reading a travelogue.
But see, that's just it. It's development, but people don't have the patience today for that extra development. They want it right in their face right now.
Right.
And so, to a certain extent, it's almost like everybody wants a short story rather than an actual novel.
That's true. I would say that's true.
Now, your first book was The Nightingale Stone, and that's where you read your Halloween reading came from.
Or
kind of, sort of. Am I completely wrong?
They're not really together. The main thing is they have the same, and we'll get to her, I guess, in a bit. But they have the same character in them. The Nightingale Stone was this was published in self-published originally in 2014, I think.
Okay.
Late 2013, and that was the first novel I had finally after two failed previous novels. Because we all have to have a failed novel in our drawer. That was the first one I'd ever been able to get complete. And it's interesting. I remember going through the feeling of, how do I start this off? I need to start this off with some spectacular scene. And it does kind of start off with something like that. But then it kind of deviates off into its own world. And that was the first one that I had really written.
But that story that we read at Halloween is that character, though. A younger version. A
younger version and in a different universe.
So it actually is a different universe.
An actually different universe, too. That character can be in, and I don't try to actually explain, okay, she's gone through a quantum hole or something like that to do it. She just runs in parallel lives. I think there's one set and that was the Ada really that was in this world. There is also the Ada that's set within the 17th century alternative history of Germany.
Right.
There's another Ada that's in a diesel punk universe, and there's another Ada who lives in Missouri, and she runs a motel where a lot of reenactment people stay.
And what's her last name?
Her last name is Ludenow, through all of them.
Oh, okay.
And that's the thing. She always stays the same. She always looks the same. She has the same last name. some of her language stuff is obviously a little different, but it's
universe,
basically the same person. It's just she shows up in different places. And I guess, it's funny, I've never actually read it, but I guess Vonnegut did this with Kilgore Trout.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so she's
yeah.
somewhat similar to that.
Vonnegut did a lot of weird stuff with his characters and bounced back and forth, and that was when he first came out. Everybody said, "This isn't ever going to sell," Just like Gravity Rainbow, same thing, and people all of a sudden, "No, this is weird enough. We like it."
Yeah.
So, but when you first started publishing, you kind of started out with your own. You were trying to basically self-publish.
Yes.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us how that went?
Well, I hated self-publishing for some very good reasons. It's hard. There's some people who are really, really good at it. I think if you are a natural marketer, a natural raconteur, and you enjoy doing that and you kind of get energy from it, those people need to self-publish because they're great at it. And I've recognized that, and I just also know that I'm not one of them. I did like the aspects of having to design the book, the technical aspects of having to design the book, learn about leading, and my one rule always is, when in doubt, use Garamond. It's been around for 500 years for a reason. All of those things I loved about the process, but I didn't really like the marketing and kind of going door to door and beating the pavement to go to bookstores and trying to get into different literary fairs and all of that stuff. So, because it took away from writing too.
Yeah.
That was the other, and I have a full-time job, so if I have that, and I have to write, and I have to do the other job of the marketing, now I have 3 jobs, and only one of them I really enjoy.
And so now, like I am, you're doing it with Blue Forge Press.
Yes.
And now I'm going to do this horrible thing, and I'm going to go, this Saturday, we're going to have a Feast of Words with Blue Forge Press down at the Silverdale Mall, and we're both going to be there. But so compare, contrast self-publishing with now that you've got a publisher.
It's much better, and I love the fact that they're a small publisher, so you have a very
intimate,
close, intimate working relationship. You can email them, they can email you with questions, and you can get that done. They're going to worry about the distributing and everything else. They're doing all of the layout stuff, although I certainly have some input with that because the graphic stuff, I do graphic illustrations for it. So they do wind up going in for that, but it's so nice to just leave that up to them.
Yeah.
And then I can focus on writing a story or illustrating pictures for it.
One thing that you said, getting back to, of course, your book and your characters, about Ada was when you sent me an email, you talked about her getting a life of her own. And I want you to explain this because this is what happens to us writers, why people think we're a little bit nuts. Why don't you explain about it?
Yeah, a lot of writers will find that they'll write a character and they have a plot idea, and okay, but the character kind of doesn't want to do that. Or they start taking over the book the way Ahab did in Moby Dick is a canonical example. With Ada, it went even further than that in that originally she was sort of, I was taking a prose poetry class at Richard Hugo House.
Yeah.
And we had some kind of a prompt, which I don't even remember, and I had this image of this very tall woman on a mountain slope in Germany in a black dress. And she had this mop of black hair and tattoos all over her hand, and she started telling me this story. And she hasn't shut up since. I wrote the book from her first person perspective, and she took that in different directions that I wasn't even, and that's very common. Then when I had to go market the book, I decided, I had to have a platform. I have to have a blog. And I thought, I'll be clever. I'll have Ada write the blog from first person. That was my big mistake because she started talking about writing this and that and talking about trying sending it to an agent. And so she started kind of tapping on the door of this world. And then, as I always like to say, right around that same time it was the first time I read Wind Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. And he's a very weird writer from Japan. And I realized that's when she started really banging on the door of this world. And some of these blog posts, all of a sudden she's writing the Hayek. And
so now she's in that.
So now she's taken over some more stuff. She has her own email address. So I had to set that up.
She's in the wide web of ether.
Yes.
And she's now self-existing in the whole electron flow on her own.
On her own, yes. In fact, there's a couple of folks, there's one person in particular at Blue Forge, seems to answer Ada's emails faster than mine.
Yeah.
So she has her, and what has happened is it's great in some ways in that if I'm going somewhere, I can always think, what would it be like for Ada to experience this? A lot of that has to do with like, what's the difference with the gender and everything else. And one thing I'll point out, a tall, skinny woman, a brunette who's literate in 17th century Germany would be a bit odd.
Exactly, yeah.
A woman like that on Capitol Hill in Seattle gets different kinds of attention. So I've had to kind of adapt into that. The other thing that's happened with it is she ages with me. So that's brought in a lot of interesting things I've had to work on as well.
Now you're working on a project, Hyperborea.
Yes.
Which brings back to me the term Hyperborea was something back in the days of, I guess you'd call Pulp Fiction and Conan and also one of these terms, kind of an alternate world, and like you said, mythology. At the same time, because of that, you elicit envy in me because in addition to being able to write, you can actually paint and draw. I can do stick figures and that's it. And we're going to try to show some of your artwork today, if we can get it in front of the camera. But so kind of maybe explain how that all got started also.
Back in 2008, when I kind of really started writing again, the first thing I'll mention is I was lucky enough to be in part of a writing collective, and we decided to do zines together. And this is this is a zine. Zines are little magazines, self-published things. They can be a lot of fun. And what I had to do was I knew that they needed to have something in them more than, and this is an example of the one I did. And actually, that's the first picture of her I ever drew.
Okay.
It's very small, it's hard to see, but that's fine. And I always knew there had to be graphic pieces of that, and I got more and more into using Adobe Illustrator, and Photoshop. Fast forward a little bit, I was lucky enough for a while to have a housemate move in with me who was 4 years old. And she likes to draw, and she actually draws better than I do. And so we both drew together a lot, and we both watched a lot of Studio Ghibli films together, like Totoro and Ponyo, and it goes on to Spirited Away. And that kind of reawakened in me my love of Japanese woodcuts, which I'd always liked even as a kid.
Yeah.
And so I thought I need to kind of have some more stuff with that. And they always, and a lot of those woodcuts they would do in a series, and they may have a haiku poem or another small prose piece that went with it. And that's what sort of inspired it. So the book itself, Hyperborea, is The Land Beyond the North Wind, which was first described, I think, by Herodotus. But it's this idea, and what it really is about is a midlife crisis writ large. And it's about being alone. Sometimes that being alone is solitude. Sometimes that being alone is being lonely. And it's Ada speaking throughout it, but the conceit behind it is that Ada would write a short prose poem essay, and I would do the illustration for her. That's the conceit behind it. And so what will happen is sometimes an image will come into my mind that I have to draw, and sometimes I'll just can hear Ada speaking this thing, and I just sort of type it out, and it works from there.
So Japanese art, and would I also be safe to say to a certain extent, anime, which is kind of like modern Japanese art, because you think it's had a big effect on your writing and also your artwork.
I would say especially the artwork, not quite as so much as in the writing, but definitely I would say in the artwork, because even the cover of this is designed to look like it looks like a Kawase Hasui woodcut.
Cool.
And I can't actually, this is one that's actually in the book.
Okay.
This is Ada waving at the Walla Walla. For those of you who know your fairies, you see the single stack there, and you'll know that's the Walla Walla. And I wanted to do, and then instead of Mount Fuji, we have that beautiful mountain we can draw and kind of lay it out the same way.
Can we do a close-up?
Everything is slightly, it's not on center, because the Japanese frequently don't do that. They will not have a center composition piece. So everything kind of goes out with a lot of empty space.
Okay.
That's an example of the Japanese influence. But this particular illustration accompanies something where she's finally feeling she can kind of rejoin the human race, and that's why she's waving at the Walla Walla as it goes by.
So it sounds like Ada's kind of literally is almost taking over your world. Or almost.
Yeah, she's the primary voice I write through now.
Yeah.
And I have never felt exhausted by it. The thing I frequently tell people, other writers get jealous of this, is she doesn't seem to suffer from writer's block.
Oh, God, that's great.
She just has lots to say. And if she gets stuck here, then she'll have a lot to say in 17th century Germany or somewhere else.
So what are some of the other projects that you're getting involved in?
Right now, I'm trying to finish up a collection of the old short fiction that I had published over the years.
Yeah.
That was set in that world, in the Hagengaard world is what I call it. And then the other project that's following that is an even bigger sort of collection of small essays that was called all those blog postings, over 300 of them that she wrote. I kind of was able to narrow it down to about 200, chop it down further from that, and kind of vamp them. Most of them are off the web now, and re-illustrate those as well for a larger collection that's coming out, hopefully at the beginning of next year.
What would you tell somebody in the audience today, if any advice you'd want to give them if they want to be a writer?
Don't worry about overwriting. Write. One of my biggest problems I had to overcome was thinking, I don't have any time. I don't have any time for this. Every word's got to count. And you wind up overthinking that way, and you don't write well. You can always edit it out. So I've actually found and actually drawing has helped me understand this, is like a sketch is just a sketch. You draw the sketch to get the idea, but then you don't use it. Yet its imprint is still somewhere in the finished work. But I think a lot of people can sometimes overthink and get stuck and like, oh, I have to write this, you know, I have to write like Neil Gaiman the first way, the first time. No, you don't. You can actually overwrite and then trim things down. I wish I'd learned that lesson actually back when I was in my early 20s. But that's what I would say to somebody who's starting out.
But you also have to find your own voice. Would you?
Yes, and that's one reason I have stuck with Ada. She's the face of the brand now. I get a lot of more positive feedback on her voice than anything I wrote through my voice prior to that. And I thought, I'm not going to mess with it. I'll just let that go.
Of course, you realize she's reaching in from an alternative universe and trying to take over. So.
Yes, and as I think I may have mentioned to you one time, the Greeks had a word for that kind of a being.
Oh, what is it?
Well, they sang of the wrath of Achilles, and they sang of Odysseus. It's a muse, a real muse.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A real muse is this
the real
being
muse
that speaks through you. It's not, you know, it gets used in a lot of different ways now, but the original meaning of this kind of deity that actually speaks through you, that's more of what it feels like. And I'm not going to argue with it.
No, I don't blame you. If somebody was interested in your work and wanted to get a hold of you, how would they get a hold of you?
You can go to www.hagengard.com. It's HAGENGARD.com. That's kind of probably the best introduction to everything there. You can look up through Blue Forge Press. On that Hagengard.com website, I've got ISBNs and things. So if you want to find the books and links to a certain online retailer, you can certainly purchase it there. And there's some actually artwork. There's actually some artwork for sale at Winery in Woodinville that I'm blanking on because I dropped it off there so long ago.
So you've got some of your artwork floating around too, where they can take a look at it. Okay, great.
Yeah. Actually, the neat thing for small events, which is the book I didn't talk about, it's a little collection of poetry, and I won't go into it too much. But the cover art here was actually one that got selected down at the Art Collective in Bremerton one year. They had it in their show, which was nice, and was able to use it again as the cover for that piece.
Well, thanks again for coming, and hopefully you can make one of your meetings of our Kitsap literary artists and writers, regular meetings like your mother, J.W. Capek, who is the science fiction writer that we were talking about. I also hope you can make some of our claw events, like Blackberry Festival and stuff like that. So once again, thank you very much,
Mark. I appreciate it.
And we would like to thank all of our viewers for tuning into Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers Showcase. Of course, without the BCAT staff and the director's booth and on camera, none of this would exist. BCAT recently had an open house to demonstrate this new digital equipment and to explain how you, members of the viewing public, can become involved in the Access Television production. Do you have a subject or activity you would like to showcase on BCAT? Please contact manager John Roush and pick his brain as to how to fulfill your dreams. For BCAT exists to support the residents of Kitsap County. This program will be broadcast Saturdays at 6 p.m. on Wave Cable Channel 3 and Comcast Channel 12. You can also watch it on live stream at www.bcat.com at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can keep in touch with CLAW on social media, i.e. Facebook, for upcoming events. Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers meets the first and third Wednesdays of every month at Spiro's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington. On the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m., there is a companion Kitsap Peninsula Filmmakers Group meeting at the Family Pancake House on Wheaton Way in Bremerton. CLAW exists to help all artists and writers to create, publish, and market their works. All creatives are welcome at all of our meetings. CLAW and affiliated residents have some upcoming events. CLAW is also sponsoring booths at the Kitsap County Fair in August and the Blackberry Festival on Labor Day weekend for those viewers wishing to talk with local authors. CLAW will also be at the Kitsap Mall every Saturday from 12 noon till approximately 6 p.m. during book month in October of 2019. And of course, you must watch our famous Halloween and Christmas shows, which will be broadcast again this year. I hope all of the viewers have a pleasant evening and a productive week. Remember, keep reading and writing. Until next Saturday, this is Mark Miller with Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers at the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television Studios, signing off. Good day.